Open States, website supported by Budget, Nigerian civil society organization, which says it is helping people find and access open government data. That's information I found on its website. Well, it has published what it calls budget implementation reports for the first quarter of 2024, not for the federal government, but for state governments in Nigeria. Now, how many times do we talk about state governments? Well, findings from that report made it to today's front page headlines, with a Punch publishing on its front page that 30 governors spent 968.64 billion naira on refreshment and others in 3 months. Now, whilst the headline may be attractive and may call for a lot of debate, it is important to delve or dive into the details of the spending. And the good people at the Punch did so. Now, they report that Benue State, Imo State, Niger State, Rivers State, Sokoto State, and Yobe States didn't have any budget data for the first 3 months of 2024. Surprising, right? Well, the analysis of the report by Open States shows that 30 state governments spent the following amounts in the first 3 months of 2024. Let's run the numbers. 5.1 billion naira on refreshments for guests, people who visit government house, government functions, what they eat and what they drink. 5.1 billion naira for 3 months. 4.67 billion naira on sitting allowances to government officials. So people who are in government, they have a committee meeting, they go for that meeting, and when they leave, they give them something aside from their salary. 34.63 billion naira on local and foreign travel expenses. That's self-explanatory. 5.64 billion naira on utility bills, amounting to 50.02 billion. That's if you add the 30 states, all these expenditure in these categories amount to 50.02 billion. We'll look at some states as we go on. But we must also mention, and I think the Punch mentioned that in their analysis of that report by Open States, these 30 state governors spent 405.77 billion naira to pay workers' salaries. The report lists other recurrent spending items to include spending on foreign and domestic travel, like we said. Oh, internet access. They had to pay fees to access the internet because it's not free. Entertainment, exactly, entertainment. Foodstuff, refreshment, drinks, honorarium and sitting allowance, wardrobe allowances, telephone bills, electricity charges, stationery, anniversaries and special days, welfare, aircraft maintenance. Yes, some states are maintaining a fleet. Newspapers and magazines and periodicals and more. For instance, we're talking about recurrent expenditure. In Q1 of 2024, Abia State spent 10.92 billion naira on its recurrent expenditures. Yeah, why Abia State? Why Abia State? Because they're the first state alphabetically, so we always start with them. This amount included 165.38 million naira on refreshments, okay? Something to drink. And feeding, 39.26 million naira on utilities, 214.57 million naira on sitting allowances. One wonders how many of those people paid a salary by government. 127.1 million naira on local and foreign travels. That's first 3 months. Among miscellaneous expenses, Adamawa State expended 23.7 billion naira on recurrent expenditure, with 287.61 million naira spent on refreshment and feeding. 109.62 million naira utilities, light bill, water bill, and all that. 79.57 million naira on sitting allowances. 768.77 million naira on local and foreign travels. I'll take one last state and we go to our guest, Akwa Ibom State, because it's an oil-producing state, one of the highest recipients of allocations in the country. It had a recurrent expenditure of 46.85 billion naira, which if you break it down, it includes 4.46 million naira on refreshments, pretty low compared to the other states, or 3 months. 223.32 million naira on utilities. 6 million naira on sitting allowances. Pretty low compared to the other states, maybe. 214.61 million naira on local and foreign travels. Let's stop there, because if we go to Anambra State, we might not finish. I want to introduce our guests tonight, starting with, in no particular order, El-Rufai Lawson. He is a National Secretary, Campaign for Democracy, CD. Viola Kwaga is a senior researcher and policy analyst. They both join us via video link in Lagos. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program tonight.
Good evening.
Delighted to be here.
All right. I'll start with you, Femi Lawson. Looking at all these figures, it's a lot. If I read everything from all the states, we probably will not finish tonight. I also would like to introduce another guest who we have on the program tonight. Achike Chud, I saw your name, your face popping up. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
All right, you have to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Okay, all right, we can hear you now. Thank you very much. Okay, Femi Lawson, any alarm bells here? I'm sure you've read the report or excerpts of it. Any alarm bells here?
We should be concerned because I must first and foremost give kudos to organizations that are involved in, transparency, advocacy, like Budget, who are beginning to let Nigerians know what governance has become and how Commonwealth of the people are being administered by the states. This would also have to trickle down to other levels of government in the future, because a lot of times we focus so much on what happens in Abuja, what is the national budget, how much is the presidency spending on diesel, on buying vehicles, and that doesn't be the focus of Nigerians. What is happening in Abuja? What is happening in Abuja? But today we are beginning to see that a lot of our states are immersed in the kind of spendings that we only in the past have been associated with the National Assembly or the presidency. We cannot but ask ourselves if we can, as citizens, boldly say that this state in the first quarter of the year has been able to deliver capital projects, capital expenditures to the tune of nearly 1 trillion naira that have been spent on recurrent expenditure by these 30 states. Apart from about 400 and something billion that has been said to have been spent on salaries, which are mostly consumed by political appointees of the states, you have to realize that over 500 billion of this spending, that is nearly 1 trillion naira, have gone on items that ordinarily do not have direct impact on the people, do not have direct impact on the well-being of the people, do not have a direct impact or result on the welfare of the people of these 30 states. And you should be concerned as citizens about how we spend so much servicing the life of a very few people in power at the detriment of the larger population of our people, as seen in the pattern of spending by this various state government.
Okay, Viola, okay, we'll go to Viola later. Viola, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. Viola, as far as you're concerned, we can't see you, so kindly, that's perfect. As far as you're concerned, any alarm bells here?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start by thanking Mr. Lawson for his kind words. The challenge really is getting Nigerians to understand that they are basically citizens of two countries at the same time. They are citizens of a federal republic and they are citizens of a state. And that requires a level of engagement that may push them out from their comfort zone. It's been said that the price of democracy is eternal vigilance. Now that means engaging at every level with your elected representatives, with the people who govern over you, and making sure that you are asking questions, you are demanding answers. I would like to maybe comment on the 2022 fiscal year. So my organization, of course, has the State of States reports that we release every fiscal year. And there was one bright spot. There was an increase in total IGR of the 36 states by about 12%. Now, that is an average measure, and we're talking about the 36 states. So obviously, there are certain states that would be responsible for that growth in IGR, and they are what we call the usual suspects. They are the states that tend to do very well in our State of States ranking, which has about five indicators. The not so good news is there was an increase to about 61.4% of dependence on federally allocated revenue. This is higher than the around 50% of the previous fiscal year. So the dependence on federal transfers increased by about 11-12%. Another not so good news is about 32 states in the federation relied on, for their total revenue, or rather 50% of their total revenue was, relied on from federal allocations. So out of every 2 naira, 1 naira came from federal allocations, and about 16% of states relied on federal allocations for 70% of their revenue. So, I mean, I'm not particularly alarmed because these are things that have been in the offing for several years. And Nigerians really need to come to terms with the fact that the same scrutiny, the same attention, the same demand for answers that we put forward to the federal government is the same way we need to treat the states. These problems of bad governance, of corruption, of poor accountability will not go away by magic. They will not go away if we wish them to. They must be engaged with, they must be discussed with, and we must, put our money where our mouths are as Nigerians.
All right, interesting. I must point out that you are a senior public policy and research analyst with Budget, who is associated with Open States. And there we see you guys go again, coming out with the figures. Achike, good to have you, public affairs analyst. Viola has talked about how dependent states, from their research and from their data, are on federal allocations. For instance, it says for about 32 of the states, for every 2 naira that they spend, about 1 naira comes from federal allocations. Well, forgive me if I'm stating it loosely. And about 17% or so of the states have 70% of their expenditure is funded by federal allocations. Now, what does that say? And why should Nigerians be concerned about this statistic?
Well, beyond the statistics, I would respond to that, but beyond the statistics is what happens eventually, even when the revenue is coming. Whether they are coming, whether they're internally generated, maybe 90% of the time or 10% of the time, it's irrelevant, really. Because it's what happens. So you can say, well, they are doing well because they are now generating 100% internally, or maybe 50% internally, that there's an upward swing. But what happens to the money ultimately at the end of the day? It is not useful to the people, it's not beneficial system we have. But again, if you want to talk about it again, it speaks so much about the kind of dysfunctional politics that we have, the kind of system of governance that we have, that people have been talking about, and Nigerians have been saying for a very long time, it is absolutely unsustainable. And so perhaps there has to be a different way of doing things differently. A situation where over 70% of items on the Constitution, resources, access to resources of this country are in the exclusive list, at the disposal and the disposition of the federal government, while the states are in their own states. It's absolutely something that is unsustainable, because we have to devise a formula to be able to have a situation where the people and harness the resources available to them and be able to give to the center. So what we are now going to have is that if states are allowed to keep about 70% of the resources that come, you will have 36 states in this country, including the federal capital, contributing generously to the federal government while they keep large chunks of the resources from their state for themselves. So it becomes a win-win situation. The federal coffers are awash with funds, the state coffers are awash with funds. But beyond that, if we don't do anything about the endemic corruption in this country, regardless of how much resources are located and the states are having access to, all of these monies will end up in the pockets of the political elites and their friends and their acolytes. And that is what is happening. So obviously something needs to be done. And it's not, you were asking the question, should one be alarmed? If one should be alarmed, that alarm should start from 1999 date. Because it is the same thing, there's nothing that is different.
Okay, I'll take it to that.
Just what
we'll come back to that,
Yeah, go on.
that point later. Interesting points you've raised. Olufemi Lawson, going by what Vala and Achike have said, does this therefore strengthen the argument for greater resource control, whereby states will have to spend what they make internally rather than share resources from those who have to those who do not have? Because it seems like everybody is spending what they just go to the center to get.
I think the state will become more responsible if we told the part of resource control that we have continuously advocated. It may not be a key to ensuring total accountability, because some states cannot actually be easily, rescued from the culture of the kind of spendings that governance have become in Nigeria, particularly across our state. Because when you look at corruption, when you look at other issues that are affecting productivity, that are affecting the development and growth in Nigeria, you realize they are more endemic at the state level. That nonetheless, I think the tendency for people, especially for those states who sit and wait for the next 30 days for the automatic allocation coming from Abuja, which can be spent anyhow without recourse to the aspiration of the people of that state, may become minimal, because some states may not be able to have as much as they are currently earning if they refuse to be productive and, of course, explore productively their own available resources. And I think that will reduce some culture of this, so much recurrent, spending by our states. And I also believe that stakeholders at state level will become more interested in how state resources are spent. Today, a lot of our House of Assemblies are impotent. A lot of other structures within the state are acting impotent because they do not actually have a say on how monies accruable to the state from federal allocation are spent. It is like the governors are the Alpha and Omega who goes to Abuja, get this money for the state, and our state House of Assemblies have been reduced to beggars who have to look forward to the governor to bless them in the way they used to put it. But if these resources are generated within the state, it will create a culture where people will have the true sense of ownership of these resources, and they may not see it as a goodwill from Abuja, like the current federal allocation system looks like. Because a lot of time people think it's a favor done to the state by Abuja when allocations are increased or when they come in time, not knowing that some of these are product of the resources taken from their land, and sold by Abuja to give them back.
All right.
Those
All right.
So those peanuts.
Okay, interesting. Vala, what do you say?
Since point, and also an additional point that Mr. Chude made. The issue is that our present political state more or less is the reverse of what happened in the history of Western Europe and countries from where we borrowed our system of government. In those countries, it started with a king, a monarch, or a set of elites that were absolutely powerful. And through interventions by middle-class people, through interventions, by people in the justice system, there was the creation of a people's representative body. And it was that body that served, as the oversight over the king, the monarch, or, what have you. However, in Nigeria, just like Mr. Lawson pointed out, the very body that is institutionally equipped to provide oversight, for this executive is oftentimes basically in his pocket. I mean, I saw a story on the news a couple of days ago about a governor in a South state gifting jeeps to judges. I mean, why should judges have to receive a gift of jeeps that they should statutorily, get? Why should it come as a gift? Now, what does that even portend for the dispensation of justice in that state? It's going to be tainted, and it's going to cast a lot of aspersions, on the quality of justice derived from systems like that. So I will say that there really does need to be some serious question answered as regards what states really want to do. I am all for restructuring in the sense that states are given access to more revenue, but they're also given more responsibilities. The federal government should actually even be the one proposing bills to divest itself of these responsibilities so the states can handle them. Maybe when the states see that, these things are actually very difficult, there would be a renegotiation of how to go about certain aspects of our governance. But by and large, I think the cap in hand going to Abuja thing has really eaten into our sense of political culture. And unfortunately, because governors are basically the alphas and the omegas of their states, there's very little that people can get in edgewise or wordwise as regards accountability and having some semblance of good governance.
Interesting. I want to go to Achike Chude. It could be argued that the business of government is expensive. It's not cheap. Also, people demand these things. I'm trying to look at the figures from Abia State. For instance, you have a delegation of sociocultural groups, united sociocultural groups of Abia State, from Ndoki to Umuahia to wherever. And they pay a solidarity visit to Governor Alex Otti. For instance, this is hypothetically speaking. They expect that they won't leave empty-handed. First of all, the governor will have to buy kola nut. He has to buy gin. He has to buy hot drinks, beer, soft drinks, refreshments, and all that, so that they can be fed, they can drink, and also they will cook food. Apart from that, when they're leaving, they also expect that they won't leave empty-handed. Both the youth groups that go, the women's groups, the traditional rulers, and all that. So isn't this all part of what we as a people in this country demand of government? Achike.
Well, I think it is because over the years they have built a culture of servitude, because they have impoverished people and kept them poor and helpless, so that they will keep. Somebody once said that a man is loyal to the person that puts bread on his table. And so that is what the political class have done. And so you talk about the weaponization of hunger, of poverty. That's what they have done. So and the elites, the political elites also realize the fact that they were not only the sole owners of the party, but you have a situation where elites who have government now own political parties, they bankroll political parties, and then in terms of the membership of the parties, they have to bankroll the members of the party when they come, for party meetings. And
Achike, are you there?
And it is the same thing. Like I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, and it is the same. Yes, and it is the same thing, that happens in government, because you see they have bought the people. They believe that they own the people. So you have a situation where in the United States, for instance, the presidential campaigns, indictment, what happened in a space of about 3 days, 4 days, he had raked in about over 200 million naira from the ordinary people, even people who are giving $5. They also get money from the people who also try to bankroll their political parties and all that. So there is this affinity with the party. In Nigeria, it is a completely different thing. The political elites who have stolen everything from the coffers of the government now use this same thing to bribe the people. And so when you now say that people visit governors for solidarity visits and governors have to give them something, have to give them money, it is a perversion of the politics of democracy that we're talking about. So, and it is sad, it is unfortunate. It is not expensive, like you say. Yes, the presidential system is expensive. There are other systems of government, like not as expensive, it's far cheaper. But beyond that is the fact that it is expensive because the political class, just take what does not belong to them. And from what you have read out, the amount of money that's been spent in 3 months, by 30 states of this country, it is not because it is expensive. It is because our politicians are profligate and they have itchy fingers. And so they're always dipping their hands into the public till. That's just what it's all about, is sheer criminality and sheer irresponsibility on the part of the political office holders. Not because it is expensive. They make it expensive. If you talk about the cost of governance, it is because, and these are people that, the minimum wage, for instance, what, in terms of the cost implication of the minimum wage, they have spent about double of what they should even pay for.
All right, Achike, we'll come back to that. Yes, we'll come back. You see, it's taking you a long time to talk because, Achike, you know that we as a people, the Nigerian people, In fact, indeed, the African people, we are like this. We are African in nature. When people sit down, people gather, there must be food, there must be drinks, you must have something to go around. That's who we are in Africa. Maybe that's why it's taking you a long time to explain this away. When we come back, you talk to us some more about that. I'll also take the thoughts of Femi Lawson and Viola Kwaga on whether we, the people, are actually ones making these demands. We'll be right back. I mean, things like housing allowance, rent allowance, meal subsidy, we'll talk about all that when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still having a conversation on government expenditure. Today, of course, our focus on the subnationals or state governments who combined have spent a total of not less than 968.64 billion. All right, so much I had to be sure, but it involves also salaries and all that. But I think where the concern by our guests is on the overheads, a particular also recurrent expenditure, where some governments have been spending on things like refreshment, spending on things like newspapers, spending on things like local and foreign travels, utility, sitting allowances, food, honorarium, wardrobe, telephone bills, and all that. And we still have with us Ajike Chude. He's we're trying to get his data right so that we can put him back on. But still with us, we have Olufemi Lawson. Olufemi Lawson is the National Secretary Campaign for Democracy. We have Viola T. Kwaga as a senior researcher and policy analyst with budget. They both join us from Lagos. Olufemi Lawson, well, I want your take on this debate about the people making demands and also about government being expensive. Because it could be argued that if you go into the details of these spendings, you realize that maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. Just maybe it was worth it. What do you say to this, sir? Femi Lawson.
If you go into further details,
Femi Lawson, we lost your audio. I don't know if maybe you can check your device. Why you try to fix that? Let's go to Viola. Femi Lawson, are you there? Okay. Viola, what do you think about this whole debate while Femi attends to his audio?
I mean, it's one that is something that constantly needs to be interrogated. Nigerians need to ask themselves, why does government exist? What should a government do for me as a person? What sort of relationship will define that exchange between a citizen and a governor, between a citizen and a member of the House of Assembly, between a citizen and a judge? We need to ask ourselves these very, very basic questions. This is why some countries prioritize the teaching of civics in high school, secondary school, some even as early as primary school, for instance, because there needs to be an inculcation of these values, of this attitude towards accountability, towards transparency, towards understanding that it is a relationship. Philosophers call good governments, they explain them as having a social contract. The citizen pays taxes, the government in turn provides goods and services. So the question then becomes, how do you create a proper social contract that is well regulated, that is fair, and that defines the roles and responsibilities of citizens and those in charge of government? Now, these are constant, exchanges. These are constant discussions that we need to have. I think it was Obama that said, democracy is the world's longest running experiment. Some countries, have not really been able to get it right. Some countries have been able to serve as exemplars for the rest of us. But for Nigeria, because of, I suppose, the nature of our history, our ethnic differences, religious differences, age demographics, we all have very different conceptions of what a government should do. But I find it very interesting that in Nigeria, the states as they are basically creations of military governments. And I suspect that it would have been different if we did not have, the military coups and the interregnums that have colored our history. Would we have 36 states today? Would there be an urgent, compelling reason to create states, because this is kind of the reason why we are here today. A lot of people who argue for restructuring claim that Nigeria was better when we had regions, when regions were in control of their resources and there was a transfer, you know, if you will, of a portion of their earnings, of their income, of their revenue to the center. The center had very little in terms of its roles and responsibilities. So you then ask yourself, perhaps that's what they're asking for, a difference in the dimensioning of roles and responsibilities of government. Going to the point you were discussing earlier with Mr. Trude, I think you're talking about whether it's in our nature. I believe that there are norms and cultures that govern the way Nigerians think and behave. One of the most inspiring and frankly mind-blowing articles I read was written by a sociologist called Peter Eke. And he wrote an article which I would urge listeners to go and look for. It's called Colonialism and the Two Publics. And one of the arguments he was making was that, I'm paraphrasing, is that the reason why corruption exists in Nigeria is because we have not been able to separate our primordial, tribalistic, ethnic conceptions of what a government should be and our civic nature, our civic mind, our impersonal, our impersonal mind. So you have like a clouding of that civic mind with the primordial, emotional, responsive mind to goods and services that, takes what is for the public to the private. And, there's a whole sort of psychological and social psychological imbalance that occurs and that results in the Nigerian attitudes, norms, and behaviors you have today. Well, as I guess I round up my submission, I do also agree with Mr. Chude's point that there has been essentially a capture by the Nigerian elites of states, of the state and of the government. And until Nigerians can understand that there needs to be serious urgency in reclaiming that state back from the elites have no incentive to be good. They have no incentive to provide good governance because they know that all they need to do is pay a couple of citizens to vote for them and, they get their way in there. So like I started off my submission earlier, the price of democracy is eternal vigilance. Nothing good will come easy if Nigerians do not see this as existential.
All right, interesting, very interesting indeed. Talking about engagement, El-Rufai Lawson, we've been down this road before. It's not the first time. In fact, in the early days of budget, we had several conversations on government spending. Why should we continue to have such conversations on government spending? Well, we talk about it every time.
About the sense of ownership that is not there yet, as we speak today, only a very few percentage of Nigerians understand that they are actually the biggest stakeholders in this project called democracy. A lot of our citizens still feel whenever government decides to build roads to their villages, whenever a government decides to light up a community with transformer by providing transformers, or that such person have done them a favor. Today the sense of ownership is not yet there for our people. Our people so much believe that they are favored by a politician who spend their own taxes to provide basic amenities for them, as citizens. So and this is deliberately entrenched by the ruling elite because they have continually taken away all forms of education, including the civic education from our people. They have continually made our people to understand that, sometimes we have seen governors on television saying, I did this. In fact, a governor has challenged people in the past on live TV for questioning him how he said, I questioned about how I spend my money. Maybe to ask ourselves the sanity behind this kind of culture that makes a governor feel he's spending his money, or the people who actually owns the chunk of the cake do not have right to determine how it should be spent. So deliberately they have taken education away from our people, and until we return to the part of educating our people, particularly on their stake in the project called democracy, this culture may continue because really no governor does any favor providing basic social amenities for the citizens, except for those who have become as uneducated as those citizens that they seek to be, to be oppressed by this culture of, impunity that has made, citizens no stakeholders, in some cases less stakeholders in the project of governance in Nigeria. So it's deliberate on the part of the political elite. And until Nigerians realize that they are the biggest shareholder in this project, this culture will continue, and we may not be seeing that anytime soon.
All right, interesting. Before I go back to Viola, some of the, Abia State is just one case point. There are others there, but not to say Abia State is the worst. I think they've received a lot of heat in recent times, especially with what Liberal Soshoma put out recently. But for instance, we have things like housing and rent allowance. In Abia State, the original 2024 budget figure was 3,803,000,000 naira. And then for the Q1 2024, it's 477 billion naira that was spent. We have transport allowance, meal subsidy, utility allowance, entertainment allowance. I don't know what entertainment allowance means. That's 7 million naira for the first quarter of the year. Leave allowance, they go for leave and they're given an allowance. 117.14 million naira. Now, this is, of course, not just for the governor or governor's office, it's across entire government spending. So, for instance, when we talk about meal subsidy, what is this meal subsidy about? Are we saying that we spend government money to buy food for government officials, or what? We have newspaper allowance. We have sitting allowance. I'm wondering if these sitting allowances are for paid government officials. Then you look at most of the states, they spend a lot on domestic and foreign trips. It's quite a lot. Where are they traveling to? So I want you to speak, Viola, to some of the headings, subheadings or subheads in this report.
Great question. I think I'll start by saying that I really need Nigerians to understand how much a billion naira is. A couple of the line items you quoted were in the billions. If I were to spend 1 million naira every day for 2 years, 1 million naira every day, including Saturdays and Sundays, for 2 years, I would not get to a billion naira. So I need Nigerians to understand just how much 1 billion naira is. 1 billion naira is 1,000 millions. It's 1,000 millions, not 10 millions, not 100. It's 1,000 millions. So to your question about the meal subsidies, the sitting allowances, it's interesting you ask. There is a challenge that we have in our organization, and this was something we noticed a lot in the federal budget, that a lot of line items were being misclassified as recurrent items, and some were being misclassified as capital expenditure. And it's important that we define just what we mean when we talk about accounting. Accounting is a precise, detailed discipline that ensures that systems, inputs, outputs, monies are well defined and properly allocated. The way we practice our government or governance in Nigeria, until quite recently, states were really doing whatever they felt like doing. Recently we adopted the National Chart of Accounts, under which all states have to adopt a uniform process and procedure for entering their spending. But this really hasn't taken away the problem of classifying some forms of those spendings that may not necessarily be recurrent and may not necessarily be capital. So the newspaper allowances, the food, the feeding, in a way they are recurrent, but they have taken up a semblance of being a capital expenditure due to their sheer size. So we need to even interrogate further, what is the amount that the state should pay a governor for his meals? I think Mr. Lawson made the point very, very interestingly, where he said that a lot of Nigerians believe that people in government do favors for them. And this is the point I was trying to make in the article I quoted, that Nigerian leaders see the public purse as their own property. They do not see it as the government or the public's property. They see it as theirs because, they worked, in quotes, they worked for it. So they deserve to spend it as they see fit. And that would take us down to questions about the politics of money and the role of money in our politics, but I guess that's not really why we're here. These line items need to be reviewed. But unfortunately, the very organ, the very body that should do the reviewing is in the pockets of the governors in most instances. And it's hard to bite the hand that feeds you.
Which body are you referring to? Is it the State House of Assembly?
I'm referring to the House of Assembly.
Okay.
Oftentimes, lots of them get there through the instrumentality of the governor. So they are beholden to them. And, there's even like a succession plan where speakers of the House of Assembly automatically become governors.
Okay.
And it's still
Vala, please permit us to take a quick break here. Olufemi Lawson as well. We still have Chike Chure with us. We'll come back and we'll take his thoughts as well. Asking, do Nigerians do anything with such information that has been available over the years? We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue our conversation with Chike Chure, Olufemi Lawson, and Viola Kwaga. Chike Chure, this information, like I said, we've been down this road before, and you're all making a case for having such conversations. But do Nigerians do anything with such information when it's available? And can Nigerians do anything with such information when it's been available from the likes of budget? Chike.
No. And they see, because, just like Lawson has said, that they do not realize that they're the biggest stakeholder in the Nigerian project, whatever that is now. And then again, Vala also said something that's also fundamental, that the political leadership or the political elites in this country do not see any incentive to ensure good governance. It's not just that they don't see any incentive to ensure good governance, but they do not feel any fear of repercussion for bad governance. So ultimately, what that means is that they do not believe that they are beholden on the Nigerian people and that they have responsibilities and duties to the Nigerian people. So, and Nigerians, on the other hand, have this feeling that government, those in government is too powerful. You cannot do anything about them. And if you look at, for instance, this test too. And so ultimately it is like a win-win situation for the political leadership and political elites in the country. And therefore, the people do not feel that they are strong enough.
But actually, what can Nigerians do with such information?
When you have information is power. I mean, that's what we've always been told. Information is power. But you see, I think the only thing that Nigerians should know, they not new to Nigerians. Nigerians for the past 10 years have always believed that their political leadership are criminally minded. I mean, talk to most of them. Talk to anybody in the bus, people on the street, market. They don't speak good of their political leadership. They just feel, they will tell you, look, not them. Whatever they do, they decide for themselves. So, and in making that statement, there is this feeling of surrender, that they cannot do anything about them because they are too powerful. So what do we need to do? Especially at the level of civil society, we have to continue the campaign of education of the Nigerian people. We have to continue to educate them, to tell them that power lies in their hands. Because the reality is that they can be the determinant of what happens, of their own future, the future and the future direction of this country. But then we need to break off that yoke that keeps them down, that keeps them believing that there is nothing. If we consider the words of Kameya,
all right,
who said that Nigeria is a criminally run corporation where the leaders are armed and are buried and are buried and with our loot buried in the safe. That gives you an idea of the structure of the Nigerian state. Apart from the
okay, Chike, thank you very much. Please, let's go to Olufemi Lawson. What can Nigerians do with such information that is always available almost every year from the likes of budget and yourselves?
I can't stop but continually appreciate organizations that are doing the kind of work budget is doing, because in fact for those who are closer or to people in position of authority, they will always tell you that these revelations are damning to the extent that, it has forced rather some people in government today to do the right thing, in some circumstances. Nigerians must take advantage of information that are provided by the media, by civil society organizations that are working on ensuring transparency, that are exposing some of these ills, and use it as a tool, not only to challenge people in authority, but also to form their decisions in their choice of leaders in elections in the country. Some of these are enough for you to determine who is elected as your leader in the state. If you look at the spending culture of some of these characters who are in position today. So I think these are very instrumental to the education we are talking about, to the civic education we are talking about, to the intention of liberating the mind of our people. They must take advantage of the opportunities provided by the works being done by budget, by the media, by the society, to empower their minds to the extent that they can understand that they should be.
Okay, El-Rufai Lawson, thank you very much. Let's go to Viola. Viola, what can Nigerians do with this information?
I mean, it's very hard to add to the points made by Mr. Lawson and Mr. Chude, but I would just like to paint a picture. So for instance, let's say you know that there's a local government election going on in your community, and it's maybe around 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. You're supposed to be at work on Tuesday. Let's say it rains that day. Would you go to work or would you go to vote? Many Nigerians might decide to go to work because it's their work that feeds them. And, in any case, politicians will do what politicians want to do. But this is the very kind of thinking that we need to begin to disabuse. I cannot stress Mr. Lawson's point enough. You as a citizen, you are the owner of government. You are government yourself. You have only given these politicians, you've delegated them to represent you. That is precisely what is happening. They are neither more superior than you in any way. It's just a matter of delegation. And if you do not see, this role that they are playing as consequential to your life, determining whether you have light in your house, whether you have water, whether your roads are good, whether your streets are safe, whether your children can go to good schools, whether you can afford to go to hospitals, then we've not really started having a conversation until Nigerians see that they are, I'm sorry to be dramatic, they are the masters of their own destinies. And a lot of Nigerians think like you. A lot of Nigerians also do not like what's going on. But I suspect that, many of us feel, I'm just one person, I cannot act alone. This is why I encourage people to join organizations, to support media and journalism organizations that even provide this information, to join civil society organizations in volunteer capacities, to even join political parties. This is how a culture is changed when people see, the culture as something worth fighting for. Sorry, they see change as something worth fighting for.
Interesting. Something worth fighting for indeed. In conclusion, the staggering figures revealed by the state's expenditure report are a stark reminder of how Nigeria's rulers feed off the sweat of the people. All right. And of course, the culture of excessive spending on recurrent expenses while neglecting the capital projects is a clear indication of misplaced priorities. It is time for the citizens of Nigeria to demand accountability from their governments and their state governors and ensure that the public funds are used for the greater good. I want to thank our guests tonight who've joined us on the program, Chike Chude, El-Rufai Lawson, and Viola T. Kwaga. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time tonight. And that's the size of a package. On Politics HQ, return tomorrow with more conversations right here on News Central Television. My name is Kofi Bartels. Good night.